What's going on? VitalSyntax here, and I know it might be kind of late to be doing something like this, but I've never done really a tutorial on how to play DayZ, and I thought it was something that is kind of needed because this game has such a high learning curve and there's so many weird aspects to the game that most players don't know about when they first start out. And although the game has been out for quite a while, and I'm guessing most players already know the basics of the game, this video is more for newcomers to DayZ, maybe that have just started playing or have been playing for a couple days or a week or so and don't really know exactly where to go, what to do, how to get good loot. And I made a video in the past, I titled something like where to get the best loot, and I was talking about the Northwest Air Base. So this is going to be kind of a precursor to that video, and I'm going to show you guys from the very beginning of starting the game how to get to the Northwest Airfield in what I see is one of the best routes. Obviously there's different routes and different ways to do it, but this is just the way that I would recommend playing DayZ and trying to get to kind of the end game, which is PvP at the Northwest Air Base, or somewhere around there, or once you have really good guns that you've gotten from the Northwest Air Base, coming back down to Turner or Electro to do PvP. Now before we get too far into how to play this game properly, let's go over how to set up the game properly. Hopefully you're already in game, and let's go over some of the settings you're probably going to adjust. The first thing is your head bob. This is under game options. You're going to either want to turn that all the way off or at least pretty far down, and it's basically the bobbing back and forth when you're in first person. Next thing is you're going to adjust the mouse smoothing, which is under controls. Turn that all the way off. It's really annoying. And then also under video settings, adjust it to whatever you feel is a good balance between frame rate and graphics. So whenever you start a new character, you're going to start somewhere on the southern beach. And if you don't know where the southern beach is, then it's probably a good idea to go to dayzdb.com. I'll put a link in the description. And look at the map, because unless you know the general landscape and the location of different major cities and airfields for Chernaris or any of the other maps in DayZ, then it's usually a good idea to kind of get a feel for things on one of those online maps. There's also maps available for the iPhone or Android platforms if you want to have that open in a new tab or another screen or on a laptop or something. That's usually a good idea to have while you're playing. So once you've spawned in and walked around a bit, try and look for landmarks, things like forest lines, tree lines, lighthouses, buildings, any type of villages or towns, islands, anything like that that would be a memorable landmark. That way every time you have that spawn point, you kind of have a good idea of where you are on the map. Now I know when you first start playing this game, it might be a little bit difficult to find yourself on the map or figure out exactly where you are. So maybe ask a friend if he knows where any of these landmarks are that you can see, or just start heading along the coastline in one direction. And if you do go to the left, meaning that the coast is on your left, meaning you're going west, then if you do hit the edge of the map, you'll be able to see that there's no trees and no grass, and that means you probably need to turn around and go the other way. Now for a new character, usually the first place you want to hit is either Electro or Cherno. Now that's not the full name, it's like Electro Gorsk and Cherno Gorsk or something like that. They have these longer names, but everybody just refers to them as Electro and Cherno. And you want to make your way to one of those larger cities. Now you do have the option to kind of avoid those larger cities and just go to farmhouses or smaller villages and cities and barns and things like that to get basic gear. That way you're going to be able to avoid any player versus player interactions, because a lot of the times other players will be able to kill you. But I think in general it's usually a better idea. It kind of depends on the population of the server. If it's a really populated server, then it might be a better idea to avoid the larger cities. But if it's not a huge population, it might be best to just head straight to Cherno or Electro, because that's where you're going to get most of the starting gear a lot more quickly than if you were just going around to small cities and barns and things like that. Now let's talk about the heads-up display. So you can see on the right side of your screen you have a bunch of different green icons. The very top one is an ear icon, and it shows your audibility to zombies. Basically, as it gets more bars, that means that zombies can hear you more easily, and as it gets less bars, you're more undetectable as far as your sound footprint goes. Same thing with eye icon, that's your visibility. So you want to keep those as low as possible, and kind of you have to, once you play enough, you'll kind of figure out what range the zombies will be able to see you at and what range the zombies will be able to hear you at different levels. So that's just something you're going to have to figure out as you play more and more. Now the next icon is a gun icon. This is essentially the combat logging icon. If it's flashing, that means you can't log out. and it flashes whenever you shoot or get shot at. That way that people can't just leave the game whenever they're getting shot or shooting, although it's kind of broken and people still leave the game in the middle of a gunfight, which is really, really frustrating. The next one is your temperature. Now, if this starts flashing or turning purple, you need to get antibiotics because you're sick. And if it starts turning red, you need to take or use some heat packs because your temperature is a little bit too low. The next one is your canteen. This is your thirst meter. Just drink any soda or drink out of a canteen that you can refill to fill the meter back up. If it ever flashes, that means that you're in trouble. So you really don't have to worry about it too much until it's flashing. That means you're actually losing blood. It does lose blood very slowly from thirst or hunger. So the next one is your blood icon. If this is basically your health in the game, if it's red, then you're in big trouble and you're going to be able to have worse vision. And if it gets low enough, you'll start just passing out. So the way you can raise your blood is by either getting a blood transfusion, but you have to have a teammate to do that. Eating beef, it has to be cooked beef, and I'll show you a little bit about the cooking meat in a little bit. Or you can just eat regular food like beans or canned sardines or something like that, although those don't give you very much health. And then the last icon is your hunger meter. If this starts flashing, then you need to eat something. If you don't, then you're going to start losing blood slowly. And just eat, a sardine or a can of beans or anything like that to replenish your hunger meter. Once you get to an area that has buildings that you'll be able to go inside of and loot items, there's going to be zombies there. That's where zombies spawn. They spawn near buildings that have items that you can loot. So whenever you run into zombies, it's usually best practice to just try and avoid them altogether. But if you do, have one chasing you or something like that, it's usually the best idea to just try and run away instead of turn around and shoot them, because by shooting you're going to probably attract more zombies and also attract other players. So the best way to get away from a zombie is either by running into trees, running into bushes, vaulting over fences or something like that. You can vault with the V key. Basically you're trying to break the line of sight. So if you run behind a tree and keep running, then you can usually get away from a zombie. Now typically it has to be a pine tree or a bush that's really thick or something like that, but you can usually get away from a zombie by just running through bushes or running through pine trees, or maybe vaulting over a couple of fences, because they can't vault over the fences and follow you. So probably not best idea to shoot at them unless you kind of last resort, or you have a silenced weapon like a crossbow or like an M9 silenced. So the basic loot that you're trying to gather at the very beginning of the game is food, drink, morphine, painkillers, bandages, a better backpack, a map, a compass, knife, axe, matches, binoculars, a primary and a secondary weapon. So that's a lot of stuff, and you might not be able to find it all in one city. You might have to go to a couple different places, or you might not find it until later on in the game. But here's my recommendations for the amount of loot that I think most players should try and achieve or try and gather. So I recommend using, or at least holding on to, like 3 or 4 food, 3 or 4 drinks, about 2 morphine, 2 painkillers, 4 bandages. Try and find a bigger backpack. Depends on the server what you spawn with, but most of the servers are going to spawn with the patrol pack. So look for something like a Czech backpack or an Alice backpack. If you do find the Czech vest pouch, then ignore that thing. That thing is even worse than the starting backpack. And then also finding the basic tools like a map, compass, knife, axe, matches, and binoculars. And then finally also finding a primary and secondary weapon, which you might not be able to find at the start of the game. Typically you can find like a pistol or something if you go to Cherno or Electro, but some of the rifles and machine guns and stuff you might not be able to find unless you start heading north towards Stary Sobor, which we'll talk about in a little bit, or the Northwest Air Base, or any of the other places like that that have higher end loot. As it sits right now in the DayZ mod, a lot of the buildings in the game are not enterable, and that's something that they're fixing with the standalone version of the game. So I'm going to go over some of the buildings that you can recognize that are enterable, but essentially what you're going to have to do is just get used to recognizing which buildings you can go into, because those are the buildings that you're able to find loot in. So look for red and orange houses that have see-through windows. Look for churches, grocery stores, firehouses. Those are like the cement buildings that have the tall spiraling staircase in the middle. Schoolhouses, military tents or military barracks, barns, and also helicopter crashes or airplane crashes. There's a couple other crashes that they've added recently into the game. So once you've gathered your basic loot, the next thing you need to do is start heading north towards Stary Sobor and then eventually to the Northwest Airfield. Now, unless you have a vehicle like a Jeep or a motorcycle or a four-wheeler, This journey is going to take quite a while, and hopefully you don't run into other bandits along the way that end up killing you and having to start over. But if you're just walking there, it's going to take quite a while. So this is a trick you can implement to make it a little bit more easy to get there a little more quickly. So hold down the W key and then press your key combo for the Steam overlay. Now if you don't have the Steam overlay enabled, make sure you go back and enable it. If you're using DayZ Commander, there's an option to enable Steam overlay in the settings. And basically all you have to do is hold forward, W key, and press your Steam overlay. It'll open it up, your guy will keep running, and then you just close the Steam overlay and your guy will sprint forever until you press the W key again. This is a really awesome trick that hopefully is something they'll add in the standalone version. And there's probably other ways of doing auto run, maybe if you have a special type of keyboard and you can set up sort of a macro or something along those lines. Now the last thing you want to do is get lost. So it's good practice to use a map if you have one and set waypoints by holding shift and then clicking somewhere on the map. And set waypoints progressively, so set it to the next village or to the next city. Don't set it to your final destination because it's not always a direct path or a direct route to get to that destination. And it's usually also a good idea to stay to roads, although you don't want to run straight down the road because other players are probably going to see you. You want to stay in the tree line next to the road, but don't try not to lose sight of the road, because if you do, you're probably going to end up getting lost and spend a bunch of time trying to figure out exactly where you are. Now I was lucky enough in this gameplay, I was heading north to Starry Subor, and along the way I found a helicopter crash. So helicopter crashes are one of the most important aspects of DayZ, and where you're going to find essentially the best loot in the game. Now there's typically somewhere between 3 and 5 helicopter crashes per server, and they can spawn anything from night vision to AS-50s, other 50 caliber sniper rifles, DMRs, high-end backpacks, ghillie suits. All of the items that everybody is trying to gather and use in DayZ can spawn at these helicopter crashes. Now there's a couple different crashes in the game, and they've added a couple of some of the more recent patches. So you want to look for ones that are smoking, that have smoke columns coming out of them. If you see one that's just a helicopter crash or maybe an airplane crash that doesn't have smoke, you can still check it for loot, but chances are it's not going to have any of the higher end items that some of the smoking helicopter crashes will have. Now, while you're checking these helicopter crashes, it's usually a good idea to check underneath the helicopter. Some of the items will spawn there, and also there's high grass sometimes if it spawns in a field, and it might be hiding some of the items underneath it. Also, make sure you be really careful of the zombies, because there's quite a few zombies that spawn at the helicopter crashes. And chances are, if you're at a helicopter crash, there's probably somebody else nearby. So always check the ridgeline to see if any other players are there waiting to see if any Bambies come by and they can get a kill. So always just kind of keep your eye out and get in there quickly, grab the loot that you need, and get out quickly. Okay, so once you reach Starry Subor, you want to check things like the grocery store. There's a couple different houses that have enterable areas, and then also check the military tents. This is very important. You can find a bunch of really good items from M16s, M4s. I found a G17 and some DMR mags for my DMR that I found at the helicopter crash. But typically you can find some pretty good gear and items here, so always check those and watch out for other players that might be checking the area. Also keep in mind, just north of the military tents there's a hill, and that's a very popular spot for bandits and other players to have a look over the map or look over the city, and they'll wait for other players to go to the military tents and they'll shoot them. So just always kind of have an eye on that hill that goes up behind the military tents for other players. So once you finish looting Starry Subor, the next place you want to head is the Northwest Airfield. Now there's 3 airstrips on Chernarus. The first one is the southern one at Belota. The second one is the northeast one, and then the third one is the northwest one. The northwest one is by far the best because it has 2 high-yield military barracks. That's where you can find really good items as well, just like the helicopter crash. Not quite as good as the helicopter crashes, but there's plenty of good items that spawn there, and they have quite a few item drops. Now, because the Northwest Airfield has these static spawn points of high-yield items, typically you're run into other players there, and if you haven't had any PvP action at this point, this is probably where you're going to come into a couple other players and have to take some shots or fire a couple shots at enemy players, because at this point most players are not willing to cooperate, even if you're a hero skin or you're not a bandit by any means. Most people are not willing to trust them because You know, they've made it all the way up to the Northwest Airfield. They've spent a couple hours trying to do so, and they probably have good loot if they're up there themselves. So if you run into another player, typically the rules of engagement are a little bit different than other areas of the map. If you're trying to play a hero character, then just avoid them, and if you're trying to play a normal or a bandit character, then obviously defend yourself if you need to, or take them out. Now, lucky for me, I found a couple different vehicles on my way to the Northwest Airfield that made the trip much quicker. And if you do find vehicles, typically you're going to need gasoline, so you're looking for jerry cans, and you might need to, you know, repair a tire or something like that. Most of the vehicles that spawn on the map don't really have that much wrong with them, but you have to have a toolbox to do any type of repairs. So a toolbox is actually a really, really important item. You can find that at the industrial spawn areas. So there's actually different types of categories for spawn. You have like military spawns, you have industrial and residential. So look for those industrial areas and try and find some jerry cans or a tire, and the toolbox if you want to do any type of repairing to vehicles, including choppers and jeeps and four-wheelers and all that type of stuff. So at this point in the game, I've been playing for about an hour and 45 minutes. And my character has a DMR with a couple of different mags, a G17, an M4 CCO, and a vehicle that's fully working with a bunch of different other items that I've stored up in there. So I'm essentially ready to engage a couple players at the Northwest Airfield and start looting the barracks. So this is where I'm going to leave the video off. If you guys want to learn about how to get the best loot and how to loot the Northwest Airfield, I'll put a link in the description to a video I did a while ago that I mentioned at the beginning of this video that essentially shows you guys how to loot the Northwest Barracks in the best way, at least in my opinion, one of the best ways, and how to go about doing that. So anyway, hopefully this was informative to some of the new players to DayZ. Make sure to subscribe to the channel if you guys want to watch more DayZ content. I might do some more tutorials and things like that. If you guys have any requests, let me know in the comments, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching.